pertaining to salmon fishing and salmon farming in BC with the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard, Madame Diane Lebouthillier, accompanied by Talib Noor Mohammed, Member of Parliament for Vancouver-Granville, and our moderator will intervene to introduce the other guests we have here today for the press conference.
Brief remarks. I'll take questions in the room and then I'll go on Zoom. So feel free to use the raise hand function at this time, and then I'll hand you over the mic. On that, ministers.
Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Thank you for taking the time to join us here at the National Press Gallery. My name is Wilson Miao. I'm the Member of Parliament for Richmond Centre, and I'm joined here by the Honourable Diane Lebouthillier, Minister of Fishery, Ocean, and the Canadian Coast Guard, and as well my colleague and friend Talib Noor Mohammed, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage, and the Member of Parliament for Vancouver-Granville. Before we begin, I would like to mention that the House of Commons is currently taking a series of votes. We may therefore have to suspend the press conference for a short period of time to allow my colleagues and myself to record our vote virtually. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded, ancestral, and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, and we thank them for having cared these lands and allowing us to all join here today. I'm pleased to MC an important announcement today on the path forward for salmon aquaculture in British Columbia. And without further ado, I'd like to invite my colleague and a great friend, Minister Lebouthillier, to share the exciting announcement.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone.
Comme Wilson vient de le mentionner,
as Wilson has just mentioned, I wish to inform you that there is a series of votes in the House today taking place, and we may have to interrupt briefly our press conference in order to be able to register our votes. As you know, wild Pacific salmon is an iconic species for the people of British Columbia. It is vitally important to Indigenous communities for food, social, and ceremonial purposes, as well as contributing to the economy of the entire west coast of the country through recreational and commercial fishing. It also plays a key role in the marine and freshwater ecosystems that it uses throughout its life while supporting a wide range of species and processes.
Already know, demand for fish and seafood as a high protein food source is increasing significantly worldwide. Pas plus tard que le 7.
As recently as June 7th, a recent report by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the FAO, revealed that aquaculture production has now surpassed fish production, and this for the first time ever in 2022. What this means is that a little more than half of the seafood consumed in the world is now produced from aquaculture. It is therefore clear that it is also a question of food security, and we cannot miss the mark. That said, we know that a number of stressors, such as the effects of climate change, pollution, shipping traffic, overfishing, and traditional aquaculture, are known to put a lot of pressure on wild fish populations. That is why, more than ever, the Government of Canada is committed to protecting wild salmon and promoting more sustainable aquaculture practices.
It is important that aquaculture production continues to grow in a sustainable manner. On peut pas rester.
We can't simply sit idly by. We owe it not only to our children, but also to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard, the Prime Minister gave me the important mandate to work with the province of British Columbia and Indigenous communities on a responsible plan to move away from open-net pen salmon farming on the province's coast by 2025. Over the past 4 years, Fisheries and Oceans Canada has heard a wide range of opinions, concerns, and points of view on open net pen salmon farming in the waters off coastal BC. And since my appointment in July 2023, I must tell you that I've been very involved myself in these consultations. It has been a thorough process, but essential to charting a responsible, realistic, and achievable way forward that will encourage the most innovative forms of aquaculture production for a more sustainable future. That's why today I am announcing to you that the Government of Canada will ban open net pen salmon aquaculture in British Columbia's coastal waters by June 30th, 2029.
I am announcing that the Government of Canada will ban open net salmon aquaculture in British Columbia's coastal waters by June 30, 2029.
To facilitate a successful transition, we know it's important to give everyone the time they need to adapt to this new reality. That's why I'm also announcing at the same time the renewal by July 1st, 2024 of salmon farming licenses for a period of 5 years. These licenses will be subject to stricter conditions that will, among other things, strengthen the protection of wildlife and the marine environment, better manage sea lice on farmed fish, improved accountability for industry, and increased monitoring of interactions with marine mammals. By renewing licenses for 5 years, our government is giving the industry time to either phase out its production or turn to farming technologies in closed containment systems in a marine environment or on land. Because when those permits expire in 5 years, it's important to understand that only closed containment systems in water or on land will be considered for salmon aquaculture licenses in coastal British Columbia. Our government, however, recognizes that closed containment systems are much more expensive and can also result in an additional financial burden. That is why, in order to ensure greater predictability for these businesses, I'm announcing my intention to issue 9-year licenses to successful applicants for closed containment production. Our government will release a draft of this transition plan by the end of July. And I can already tell you that this plan will focus, among other things, on how to support First Nations, workers, and communities during this transition, identifying economic support measures to use innovative and clean aquaculture technologies, the steps, principles, and progressive reduction criteria for open net salmon farming over the next 5 years, and the management of salmon farming in open pens until the ban is fully implemented. It is also important to remember that DFO's mandate is first and foremost the management of fisheries in Canada, including aquaculture in the case of BC. We also know that this transition has several dimensions that will go far beyond this single objective of fisheries management and will therefore inevitably involve the whole of government. That is why in the coming months, the government will identify one or more departments responsible for conducting coordinated consultations with those directly and indirectly affected by this transition to discuss the best ways to support them. So today, I am announcing the outline of a responsible, realistic, and achievable transition that promotes wildlife protection, food security, and vital economic development for First Nations and other coastal communities in British Columbia. As we continue to work with all partners with a view to providing a final transition plan by 2025, let us continue on the path of reconciliation and innovation and make Canada a world leader in sustainable aquaculture production. Thank you to each and every one of you.
Son, over to you.
Thank you, Minister Lebouthillier. And after many years of consultation, I'm sure this aquaculture transition plan will provide some much-needed certainty to the industry and the First Nation and, of course, other partners across British Columbia. And before I invite Parliamentary Secretary Talib Noor Mohammed, I understand we have a vote right now. So can we do the vote now, and then we can do the rest of the remark. Oh, good. All right, now I would like to invite Parliamentary Secretary Talib Noor Mohammed to share your remarks on this announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson. Merci, Diane, pour cette annonce très importante.
Thank you, Diane, for this important announcement.
Begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. As you all know, wild Pacific salmon are an important species for the people of British Columbia and a key aspect of BC's biodiversity. Salmon in BC are not only iconic, they are vital to Indigenous communities for food, for social gatherings, and for ceremonial purposes. Wild salmon contribute to the economy of the entire west coast of Canada through recreational and commercial fishing. Now, wild salmon are a foundational species. They play a key role in the marine and freshwater ecosystems in which they live. They support a wide range of animals like eagles and bears. Wild salmon are integral to a wide range of environmental processes, including the health of salmon-bearing streams and rivers. At the same time, we understand that the demand for fish and seafood as a high-protein food is increasing significantly worldwide. A recent report by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN reveals that aquaculture represents now a little more than half of the seafood consumed around the world. So it's clear that this is a food security matter that we must address. That said, the effects of climate change, pollution, shipping traffic, and overfishing are putting remarkable pressure on wild fish populations. Over the past years, I've heard from thousands of residents of Vancouver Granville and indeed from across British Columbia who have shared their concerns about the safety of open net pen salmon farming. Indeed, all of my colleagues from British Columbia have heard these calls. That's why now, more than ever, the Government of Canada is committed to protecting wild salmon and promoting more sustainable aquaculture practices. We simply can't sit idly by. We owe it not only to our children, but also to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The Prime Minister gave Minister Lebouthillier an important mandate to work with the province of British Columbia and Indigenous communities on the West Coast to develop a responsible plan to move away from open net pen salmon farming on the province's coast by 2025. It has been a thorough process, but one that is essential to charting a responsible, realistic, and achievable way forward that will encourage the most innovative forms of aquaculture production for a more sustainable future. That's why today we are announcing that the Government of Canada will ban open net pen salmon aquaculture in British Columbia's coastal waterways by June 30th, 2029. To facilitate a successful transition, we know it's important to give everyone the time they need to adapt to this new reality. That's why we're also announcing at the same time the renewal on July 1st, 2024 of salmon farming licenses for a period of 5 years. However, these licenses will be subject to even stricter conditions that will, among other things, strengthen the protection of wildlife and the marine environment, better manage sea lice on farmed fish, improve accountability for industry, and increase monitoring of interactions with marine mammals. By renewing licenses for 5 years, our government is giving the industry the time that it needs to either phase out its production or to turn to farming technologies in closed containment systems in a marine environment or on land. When those permits expire in 5 years, it is important to understand that only closed containment systems in water or on land will be considered for salmon aquaculture licenses in coastal BC. Our government recognizes that closed containment systems are much more expensive and can result in additional financial burden. That's why, in order to ensure greater predictability for producers, Minister Lebouthillier is announcing her intention to issue 9-year licenses to successful applicants for closed containment production. Our government will release a draft of this transition plan by the end of July. However, we can already tell you that the plan will focus on, among other things, how to support First Nations, workers, and communities during this transition, identifying important economic support measures to use innovative and clean aquaculture technologies, and the management of salmon farming in open net pens until the ban is fully implemented. Now, it's also important to remember that DFO's mandate is first and foremost the management of fisheries in Canada, including aquaculture, in the case of BC. We also know that this transition has several dimensions that will go far beyond the single objective of fisheries management and will therefore inevitably involve the whole of government. That's why in the coming months, the government will identify one or more departments that will be responsible for conducting coordinated consultations with those directly and indirectly affected by this transition to discuss the best ways to support them. So today we are announcing the outline of a responsible, realistic, and achievable transition that promotes wildlife protection, food security, and vital economic development for First Nations and other coastal communities in British Columbia. As we continue to work with all partners with a view to providing a final transition plan by 2025, let's continue on the path of reconciliation and innovation and make Canada a world leader in sustainable aquaculture production. Thank you, everyone. Merci.
Thank you to our Parliamentary Secretary, Talib Noor Mohammed. And I will now open the floor to questions from the media. We'll start with the people in the room and alternate those who are on the phone and online. As always, please begin by stating your name and identifying which media outlet you're with, and one question, one follow-up.
Merci. Et puisque c'est une conférence.
Thank you. We here will be moderating the press conference, but we will indeed begin in the room.
Sure. Hey, Nick Taylor-Vasey from Politico. I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of the conversations in caucus about this. I know that it was probably a lively conversation over years. If you can talk us through just the varying perspectives and how you got to this particular solution. That goes for anybody who wants to answer that.
Listen, what I can tell you with regard to the exchanges we've had, these were conversations within the caucus, but also with the industry, aquaculture, the Aboriginal communities, environmental groups. And as we were saying, this was fastidious work. It was a long-term consultation project. We wanted to study the very polarized positions. Last August, when this began, there were people who were opposed, people who were for. But as I mentioned, for me, what mattered was to have an approach that was responsible, realistic, and achievable. And this is why we're making this announcement today with the decisions that we've outlined. Alone, you can go far, but united, you can achieve a lot, but we have to have these discussions in order for everyone to move forward together. I might invite Talib to respond. He's chair of the caucus.
As Diane mentioned, was an important one, a lively one. And I think the thing to remember is that this is a commitment that we made to British Columbians. It's a commitment that our government made to get this done in a meaningful, responsible way. And that's what you're seeing today. And make no mistake, the caucus from British Columbia has been working with the minister very, very closely to ensure that we got to this outcome, one that supported all those that were affected, but also ensured that we got to the final outcome that we had committed, which was exactly what was announced today. And this is really what it means to be part of a team. The team effort was one that we put forward working together very collaboratively, and it was a process that I really want to thank the minister for listening and working with us to ensure that we got to a good outcome for British Columbians.
Would you describe this as a kind of a grand compromise? Some of the language in here says we're protecting wild salmon populations while also helping the aquaculture industry thrive. Would you use the word compromise to describe how you brought everyone together on it?
What I can tell you is that when we look at what's happening throughout the world, all of the wild species are in danger. We have a duty to protect wild salmon, but I'm thinking of all wild species. For me, this is important when we talk about food security. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, in 2022, we consumed much more aquaculture product than wild product. And this is part of our discussions as well. When we look at wild species, yes, we do consume some, but we mustn't forget this. The fish feed on fish. They consume fish as well. So if we want to protect wild species, if we want to move forward, we have to use aquaculture, but we must also be careful, prudent. We have to put strict measures in place, and we'll need science. And all of the people we've consulted have said this with what's going on in the world today, what we see. We must ensure that if we increase the aquaculture production, it shouldn't be harmful to wild species. So we'll always be working with science, with partners, with our caucus members, and with other colleagues as well, other MPs, because when we talk about food security, well, we have to depoliticize the fisheries file as a whole. So for me, it's very important.
We'll go to Sopal from Global, if you have questions.
Hi, Sopal Dutch from Global News. There have been allegations of government interference with scientific research on the impacts of open net fish farms. What steps is your department taking to ensure transparent and unbiased assessments of the environmental impacts as we move towards more sustainable farming practices?
I can tell you that since my arrival in the file, and as I mentioned, we worked a lot with science, both with scientists from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, but also independent scientists, people working in universities, scientists who work with environmental groups. So clearly all of this work is done collaboratively, and we're going to be pursuing this work, but we also remain very vigilant with regard to science, and as you say, anything that might involve leaks. When we look at science, I can tell you that we must recognize that I don't need science to know that oceans are getting warmer. There was no ice pack in the St. Lawrence or in Atlantic Canada. We see the fires, we see the heat waves like the one we're enduring now. Clearly, climate change is bringing change, but we must all work together to have an aquaculture sector that is sustainable and that will be profitable for all citizens. At the end of the day, what people want is when they go to buy fish, if they want to buy salmon, they should be able to find safe and secure, a safe Canadian product.
Awesome. Is there any way for me to get Mr. Normand to say that TV? And also my follow-up is, how will your government ensure that the timeline is effectively managed this five-year phase-out?
You want to finish that?
The first question in English, and then a follow-up to everybody again, too.
So on the first question, as the minister noted, this is an important, the work that is now going to be done is critical in ensuring that we recognize that protecting wild salmon is not just about protecting wild salmon, it's protecting entire ecosystems. At the same time as you recognize that there is a tremendous now dependency on ensuring that natural ecosystems and other species are well protected. That's part of what this is about. At the same time, looking at ensuring aquaculture is conducted responsibly so that we can continue to feed Canadians and others is a critical component of this strategy. And so being able to work together, doing the type of work that the minister has been doing in terms of consultations, in terms of having the conversations with industry, and stakeholders, these are going to be critical to long-term success. Obviously, the work that needs to be done has to be taken seriously. There are always going to be considerations, and there are always going to be challenges, and the work to now ensure that this is done in a timely fashion according to the timeline. These are all things that are now set in motion, and I think it's a remarkable step forward for us because it allows us to not only do the thing that we have said we were going to do, which is to ensure that there is an end to this type of open net pen farming, but also to ensure that there is a sustainable path forward using science as the way in which we deliver.
Stuart Benson, Hill Times. Oh, excuse me.
Sorry.
With regard to the time frame, I would say that with the new licensing conditions that will be much stricter, fish farmers will have to respect these requirements, and Fisheries and Oceans Canada will reinforce surveillance of fish farming. And if our conditions are not respected, then licenses will be suspended, and this could even lead to closures. There will be accountability much more systematically, and this will be made public as well. We want this information to be provided to the public so that people are able to follow this file as it evolves.
Stuart Benson, Hill Times.
Hi, Stuart Benson, Hill Times. So I just, obviously this kind of got leaked, I think, on Friday, and so I'm assuming that since then you've probably had a couple of calls and inputs from stakeholders, whether Indigenous or salmon farmers. So I'm just wondering what has sort of been that reaction to this? I know it's not all been completely positive, obviously, but just what has that reaction been like? And just, can you describe what that response has been like and the input you've gotten since then?
What I can tell you is that yesterday, having had calls with Aboriginal communities, with business people, people in the industry, as I was saying, the work is going to continue. It will be pursued. And since last summer, we've been discussing the issue. I spent a week in British Columbia. As a matter of fact, I'm going back there. I'm leaving later today, and I'll be spending another week there. We want to have an achievable, responsible, realistic plan, and this plan is going to be in place for 2025. The industry knew that changes were going to be made, and I think that all of us together, we will co-build sustainable fisheries for our population for the future.
Apologies if I'm displaying my own ignorance, but it says that the aquaculture licenses will expire June 30th, 2024. And then after July 1st, only marine or land-based closed containment systems will be considered. So does that mean that if you have an open net system and you don't get a closed containment system, you will not be able to apply for a license? So I'm just wondering how that transition works if, as of July 1st, you won't be able to use open net systems. Or if I'm reading that wrong,
I will call upon Andrea, who will be able to explain the technicalities of what's proposed.
Expire on the 30th of June, and new licenses will be issued to those open net pen farms operating right now for 5 years. So those licenses will be renewed on July 1st for 5 years. Any new applicants will need to hold up to the new requirements.
Okay, so it's any new licenses will only be able
Correct.
to use the close. Okay.
Yes. So those will be renewed. It's only for new applicants.
And the key point on this too, sorry, is that once those licenses expire 5 years hence, only closed containment, even for the existing ones, will apply. So
They have another
correct.
5 years, but that's okay. So just making sure I got that right. So yeah, that was my follow-up. So.
We'll go to Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail.
Just a quick question. Is there anything you can tell me about your thinking on income support for displaced workers in this process? Is there any early thinking about providing funds for workers who lose their jobs, basically, going forward as a result of this change?
Ben, écoutez, ce que je
What I can tell you is that at present, the workers are still working. And as I mentioned, there's a whole of government committee that it too will be in place in order to be able to support businesses for this transition. And this committee will be cooperating in the building of the new system. So there will be consultations. And as we were saying, we want to achieve a final transition plan that will be presented in 2025. But today, what we announced is the renewal of the licenses and the establishment of the committee. But the discussions will continue. And as I mentioned, it's for the future. We have to work on the future of aquaculture. And for me, it's important because when we look at the place of aquaculture for rural communities, Aboriginal communities, they create jobs, they create wealth, and we really want to be world leaders. Can we do more aquaculture? Yes, we can. We must do more aquaculture to protect wild species, but we must do this in a responsible way.
Follow-up, Ian? No? I don't know if you have a question, Anya, but we'll go on Zoom real quick. Please keep the questions and answers short if possible, so we can have as many as possible. We'll go to Jan Codine from Aquaculture North America. You have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon. I would ask how soon will the your licenses for closed containment projects be issued as part of the transition?
I'm sorry, I think we didn't have a interpretation since you don't have the required mic from the press gallery, but I don't know if Mr. Press Secretary, do you want to give a...
I can answer that. So we don't have any license applications with us currently, but we will have when we receive applications, we will process them for approval.
Do you have a follow-up? Jean, please speak very quietly.
Oh, yes, sorry. So for the closed containment projects, how many licenses are you looking to issue to be able to replace the productivity of the open net pen farms?
There isn't a specific number, recognizing that there's a broad range of the scale of closed containment operations. So we hope to be able to replace or encourage significant investment in closed containment in British Columbia, but without a specific target.
I believe we'll have time for another question. Lisa Mayer from Undercurrent News. If you don't have the required mic, please speak super slow.
I'd like to ask whether the decision makers have considered the industry's contention that it will be very difficult to transition the province's entire salmon production to land-based or closed containment systems within the 5 years that they're giving the industry.
So there is always an issue when you don't have the required mic for those press conferences. Est-ce que vous aviez bien eu la question, Madame la Ministre?
Oui, mais peut-être que je peux dire aussi, c'est les gens qui vont vouloir aller vers...
People who will be carrying out the transition, as we mentioned, they'll have an additional 9 years that will be added on. And this will help the industry transition properly.
I can just add to that. This is, the minister and others have heard very, very clearly from industry, but also from other stakeholders. 5 years is a substantial amount of time for an industry to work transition, especially when you have government that is willing to work with you, or with them rather, on this type of a transition. I mean, the key principles here are, number one, we made a commitment to deal with the issue of protecting wild salmon, but also to ensure that the transition happens in a way that ensures economic viability. And that is exactly what the minister has said we're going to do. And I think it's important now for industry to look at this as an opportunity to transition for the long term and to be building for sustainable long-term aquaculture in line with best practice globally.
Do you have a follow-up, Lisa?
Thank you.
It seems fine. I have one last person on the floor. I don't know, ministers, if you have time to take one last question, even though I believe it's time is up. You have maybe vous avez un vote? Très bien.
You have a vote, I believe?
Une dernière question. Très bien. Merci, madame.
A final question. Thank you, Minister. Fabian Dawson, CWest News.
Mike, please speak super soft and clearly as possible. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Is this open net ban only involve salmon aquaculture or all species of finfish?
Yeah. It does not apply. It only applies to all species of salmon. So there are sable fish that it does not apply to.
So it's correct to assume it's a ban on open net salmon farming, but sablefish or any other species, you will still allow open net, potentially?
So I think we have no more questions. Je crois que nous avons plus de questions. Merci beaucoup aux panélistes. Merci, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Minister. This brings to an end our press conference. Thank you, and enjoy your summer, everyone.